Justin from the very beginning was so adamant on including them because they're the ones, who made the book see the success it saw. And so it's very important that you capture the things that they loved in the movie. And they involved, had a contest and involved several readers in getting to be there for the script reading. And they were very open and receptive to their feedback. I know that their feedback actually changed some of the things in the script for the better. And I just thought that was brilliant. Who better to tell you how the script is and what they want to see in the book than the readers themselves.
Yesterday, some of you were a bit skeptical about whether I actually tracked down the lawsuit connected to that mysterious subpoena. But guess what? I was right. Not only was it the correct lawsuit, but Blake Lively's legal team has now confirmed it. Her attorney, Brian Friedman, even went on record saying he had no knowledge of this lawsuit at all. Now, things are getting messy. There's a brand new legal dispute brewing because Friedman is already suggesting that this lawsuit, the one we uncovered in our investigation, is an abuse of the legal system and due process. That could spell serious trouble for Blake Lively. The lawsuit itself was filed in the Civil Division of New York Supreme Court. It was brought by a company owned by Blake Lively called Vanzen Inc. Vanzen Inc. was originally incorporated in Delaware by Eric Rothschild and has ties to Blake. Over time, it's gone through several changes, including registering branches in California and New York. The New York branch was opened in 2019, based on records from various secretaries of state. Here's where it gets interesting. The address listed in the lawsuit, the one used to issue the subpoena, is actually connected to the California records for Vanzen Incorporated. And while that company still appears active on the surface, it's actually listed as forfeited in California. In California, if a company is forfeited through the Franchise Tax Board, it means it's not in good standing. It can't legally conduct business until those issues are resolved. I checked with the California Tax Board myself and got confirmation. Vanzen Inc. is still not in good standing. That typically means they owe money and can't legally operate in the state. So we've got this company, Vanzen, with multiple versions in different states, no clear operational purpose, and it's not in good standing. It really starts to look like what many would call a shell company. And there's zero connection between this company and people like Justin Baldoni, Jen Abel, or Wayfarer Studios. Which makes it pretty clear, in my opinion, that Vanzen Inc. was used to hide Blake Lively's identity. Instead of filing the case under her real name, she used this company as a shield. When someone uses the courts to file lawsuits under the name of a shell company, especially against unnamed John or Jane Does, it creates a loophole. They can issue subpoenas without notifying the actual people involved in the case. That's exactly what happened here. A subpoena was sent to Stephanie Jones, and under the current laws, none of the individuals who were ultimately targeted, like Justin Baldoni, Wayfarer, or Jen, were informed. And sure, some people might argue that those parties would have been subpoenaed eventually. But that's not the point. The issue is that they didn't even know it was happening. The subpoena was hidden behind a lawsuit that doesn't name them, which gave Stephanie Jones a way to share information, possibly in violation of her NDA with Wayfarer, without raising red flags right away. Many legal experts are now saying this whole thing could have been done to cover up that original improper disclosure Stephanie allegedly made to Blake back in August 2024. So what's actually being said publicly about this lawsuit? A few days ago, the Daily Mail reported on the subpoena and even said they'd seen a copy. They mentioned it was filed in New York and wasn't court-stamped, but they left out key details like who filed it and what the lawsuit was really about. And Deadline did the same. They didn't name the company, didn't mention Blake's connection, and didn't provide any context. Why not? Because if people found out this lawsuit was filed through a possible shell company, and that it may have been used to get private info without allowing those involved to fight it, it would reflect very poorly on Blake. If the public had access to the lawsuit, they'd see it had nothing to do with sexual harassment, and that Stephanie Jones, who was subpoenaed just 4 days after it was filed, already knew exactly who she was targeting. That's shady. Now the people involved are trying to spin it, claiming they didn't know what this lawsuit was, even though it's the same one I uncovered, and they're taking credit for the research we did here. So here's where we are now, and let's be honest. Daily Mail, feel free to give me some credit for breaking this wide open, okay? Anyway, back to the story. They're now reporting that Blake Lively used what they're calling a super shady legal tactic that kicked off her legal battle with Justin Baldoni before he even had a clue it was coming. say she quietly filed this under-the-radar lawsuit months before her conflict with Justin over It Ends With Us really began. The Daily Mail says their investigation uncovered the full story behind the obscure lawsuit. And sure, let's be real, that discovery was handed to them courtesy of me. Now they're sharing everything, and according to legal experts, this case looks like what they're calling a sham lawsuit. One even described the move as super shady. But here's the big takeaway. Justin's attorney, Brian Friedman, is calling this an obvious attempt to bypass the legal process, to secretly obtain documents without notifying anyone. And that, according to him, is a clear abuse of process. He's made it clear. They plan to pursue every legal option available. Friedman also admitted that he had no idea this lawsuit even existed. Not until the Daily Mail reached out to him for comment. That's wild. If the Daily Mail had the subpoena all along, why didn't they just tell him what lawsuit it was connected to? So let's recap what's been confirmed now, including what I told you yesterday. The lawsuit was filed by Samantha Katze, an attorney representing Blake Lively. It was filed just 4 days before she issued a subpoena to Jones Works. And yes, the Daily Mail confirms that subpoena was sent. They even admit they saw it. Stephanie Jones, the recipient of the subpoena, didn't fight it. Instead, she handed over a huge batch of private messages, including texts between Jen Abel and a former staff member from her PR firm, who had continued working with Baldoni. The messages even involved crisis management consultant Melissa Nathan. These messages were pulled from Abel's company-issued phone, after she told Stephanie she was quitting Jones Works back in July. The Daily Mail also confirmed something else I told you. The lawsuit was withdrawn on December 19th. Then, the very next day, Katze filed a complaint with California's Civil Rights Department. They also noted, as I did, that Vanson Incorporated, the shell company at the heart of all this, was founded in Delaware. Now, after some digging, even the Team Justin Baldoni subreddit got involved and found that the only traceable work Vanson Incorporated had done was importing some furniture to Blake's countryside home. And the name listed for attention on that shipment? Molly Caro, a PR person who's credited as a producer on a Taylor Swift music video that Blake Lively directed. Now let's get into what legal experts are saying. Ron Zambrano, who's appeared on Popcorn Planet, said, "This is a sham lawsuit generated with ulterior motives. That kind of thing wastes judicial resources and could be sanctionable. They did it in a sneaky behind-the-scenes way. It's super shady." Another attorney, Peter Gleason, who's represented plenty of Hollywood clients, added, "This looks like a ruse to make it seem like they were properly obtaining discovery, when really it was meant for a completely different case. If that's true, it's totally inappropriate." He also pointed out how odd it is that a company would sue its own employees or representatives, and do so without even knowing exactly who they are. Then our friends at the Ask Two Lawyers channel chimed in. Keith said, "It's very rare to sue only anonymous defendants. It doesn't make sense. This whole thing seems like a fig leaf to cover what's really going on." Of course, Blake Lively's legal team is defending the move. Ezra Hudson said, "These kinds of Doe lawsuits are totally normal. They're a legitimate legal tool when you're trying to figure out who's behind something unlawful. This lawsuit exposed the Wayfarer team's own plans, in their own words, to destroy Blake Lively. All this outrage isn't about legal ethics. It's because they got caught doing what they thought would stay hidden." Another LA-based attorney, Lincoln Bandlow, agreed that it's not necessarily unusual to sue unnamed defendants, especially in situations like defamation cases involving anonymous online users. He said, "All Blake did was use Vanson Incorporated to keep things low-key and out of the media spotlight. If they were trying to stay under the radar, it makes sense. There's nothing unusual about this approach if someone's trying to figure out who's acting against them." Now let me just say this, especially for those of you who haven't been through the civil litigation process. Now let's be real. The average person isn't out here filing lawsuits against people they don't even know. Why would you spend $30,000, $50,000, or even $20 million on a case where you haven't even identified the defendants yet? That kind of legal move is a luxury, something only the incredibly wealthy can pull off. In this case, Blake Lively wasn't actually in the dark about who she was targeting. She used the Doe defendant strategy not because the identities were unknown, but to work around the system. Just 4 days after filing that mysterious lawsuit, she subpoenaed Stephanie Jones. So how would she have known to go after Stephanie unless she already knew who was involved? Let's call it what it is. This is gaslighting. Trying to spin this whole thing as totally legal and ethical? That's misleading at best. Lawsuits like this are not only shady, they can be sanctionable. When you file a lawsuit just to get your hands on information you wouldn't otherwise be entitled to, that's called abusive process. That's exactly what Justin Baldoni's legal team is pointing to. They've made it clear they're pursuing all available legal options, and abusive process is a big one. Let's break down what that means. If Baldoni and his team can prove abusive process, it could seriously help their case, especially when it comes to showing malice. They could turn around and sue Blake and possibly Jones' works, arguing that this lawsuit was filed in bad faith, that it was a scheme, not a legitimate case, created solely to dig up information unrelated to any real legal claims. Here's the kicker. Blake filed this suit against unknown parties, but then 4 days later, subpoenaed Stephanie Jones. That's a pretty clear indicator she already had a target in mind. And then they admitted that the subpoena is what led them to the now infamous text messages. So if those messages were obtained through this shady lawsuit, and Blake knew exactly where she was going with this, it becomes a legal issue. If you don't name someone in a lawsuit, you don't have to notify them about a subpoena. That means nobody has a chance to challenge or block the information grab. Baldoni's team could argue all of that as part of their abusive process claim, and they'd likely argue that it caused harm. For example, that Blake used these texts to falsely accuse Justin of sexual harassment, or to back up false claims that were already out there. That she tried to fix an illegal leak of private info from Stephanie Jones, who, according to her agreement, was only allowed to share information with a valid subpoena. And guess what? That subpoena didn't come until October. Stephanie gave up the info months earlier in August. So Blake's legal team could be seen as trying to cover up that early disclosure, helping Stephanie dodge a breach of contract lawsuit in the process. By doing this, they may have interfered with a contract between Stephanie and Wayfarer, which is a whole different legal issue. Legally, here's how abusive process works. If someone uses the court system with malice, just to serve their own personal agenda, and that agenda has nothing to do with what the lawsuit is supposed to be about, then that's an intentional tort. Wrong. It's punishable. Not only that, but anyone who helps trigger a lawsuit like this, even if they're not technically a party in the case, can also be held responsible. That includes Stephanie Jones. She wasn't named in the lawsuit, but she actively took part in the legal maneuvering. According to Baldoni's legal team, that could make her liable too. And it doesn't stop there. If Wayfarer wanted to, they could actually file a motion to disqualify Blake's attorneys. Why? Because if the attorneys knowingly took part in this abusive process, that's an ethical violation. It could be considered misconduct. The argument would be that this whole legal tactic undermined the integrity of the court system. And when an attorney uses the law for something illegitimate, like harassing, intimidating, or gaining an unfair edge, that's abuse. Here's why that matters so much. When Blake's team subpoenaed Jones' works, they didn't notify Baldoni or Jen Abel. So nobody was there to object or challenge the release of those messages. There was no legal pushback. Compare that to what happened when they tried to subpoena Baldoni's team. They sent out very broad subpoenas, wanting over 2.5 years of phone records, texts, and documents. And when they tried that, the judge shut it down. The court ruled they were invading privacy. So odds are if they'd tried the same thing through a normal lawsuit, a legitimate one, in New York, the judge there would have probably quashed the subpoena too. By skirting around the rules and avoiding proper notification, Blake's team was able to get their hands on private information they never would have been allowed to access otherwise. Beyond just disqualifying attorneys, courts can also impose serious penalties, including fines or monetary sanctions, for misconduct like abusive process. This kind of misuse happens when lawyers cross ethical lines, like using discovery to harass or intimidate someone, filing baseless lawsuits just to stall or sabotage proceedings, or even lying and manipulating the facts to deceive the court. Lawyers are supposed to uphold the integrity of the legal system, ethically and professionally. When they use legal tools for the wrong reasons, they're breaking that trust. That's why abusive process is not only a legal issue but an ethical one too. And in this situation, proving that kind of abuse could seriously help strengthen Baldoni's case, especially if they're trying to establish malice, which would be key if this ever goes in front of a jury. Now you'll probably hear Blake's team try to brush all of this off by saying, well, you're just mad you got caught. But honestly, that sounds a lot like classic gaslighting, flipping the narrative, trying to make the accused seem like the aggressor. It's like saying, yeah, I did something wrong, but you're only upset because it came out. So what exactly did Baldoni get caught doing? According to the texts Blake released, and mind you, she only gave the New York Times a piece of the full conversation, it looked like Justin and his team were talking about ways to defend himself online against accusations of sexual harassment and being labeled a predator. That plan was never even put into action. What Blake left out of those messages tells a different story, one that undercuts her entire claim. Sure, some of the things said in those texts weren't the nicest. For example, someone said something like, I want to bury her. Hey, that's intense. But people say things like that when they're emotional, when they're feeling blindsided or angry. That doesn't mean he followed through on any of it. Context matters. You can't just pull out one sentence and say it proves everything. You have to look at the full picture, the entire conversation, the whole situation, to understand intent. If Blake's team had that full context, they would have used it in their legal filings. But they didn't. Instead, they used selective messaging to launch a public smear campaign. She's even gone as far as accusing content creators of secretly working with Bellin, when those same creators have gone on record with the New York Times saying, no, I had nothing to do with this. Meanwhile, others online were speculating that I must have received leaked info from Baldoni's team, like Friedman gave it to me directly. That's just not true. I found it myself. The problem is, Blake doesn't want to believe that there are people online who just don't support her. And that has nothing to do with Bellin. Is it fair that some people don't like her? I don't know. But is it wrong for people to have gotten frustrated with her during the promotion of her film? I'm not sure. She touched on domestic violence a little during the press tour, but not in the way that many felt she should have, considering the themes of the movie. What really seemed to rub people the wrong way was how much she made it about herself, constantly emphasizing that this isn't a movie about domestic violence. It just felt tone deaf. Look, it sucks when the tide turns against you. Getting cancelled, or whatever you want to call it, isn't fun. But nothing on the internet lasts forever. Everyone gets a chance to rebrand, to make a comeback. The problem is, what Blake is doing here. It's not helping. In fact, it's making things worse. Because we're now seeing the legal tactics she's allegedly using to gain access to information she shouldn't have had in the first place. And it raises a much bigger question. How often are these kinds of strategies used behind the scenes to intimidate or silence people? If you're someone without money or power, going up against someone like Blake Lively would be terrifying. She could drown you in legal fees, drag you into court, and file damaging lawsuits filled with false claims just to crush your credibility. And at that point, what do you even do? Most people would fold. They'd give her what she wants just to make it stop. That's not justice, that's control. Personally, I think a lot of folks online are just trying to make sense of everything. They're piecing it together, looking for the truth, because not all parties have been transparent. And when that happens, people naturally start to fill in the blanks. Meanwhile, the Daily Mail is now trying to take credit for work that I did, work that exposes how they previously helped cover for Stephanie Jones. And let's not forget, media outlets get fed curated narratives by PR teams. They're often reporting whatever version of the story benefits whoever's feeding them information at the time. So what do you think? Do you believe Baldoni's team will file new claims? Could Blake's legal team actually be disqualified? Might someone on Baldoni's side file a bar complaint? Could these attorneys face sanctions, or even disbarment? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Give this video a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to hit that bell so you never miss an update. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one. Bye guys.